How is it there? And do you? I understand there is a Sahitya Parishad also in Sikkim, right? A local body, Sahitya Parishad.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
have.
So
They do
and
have
do they sort of help you in reaching
no, no,
out?
I don't
Yeah.
think so. I got any help from the Sahitya Parishad. The Sahitya Parishad recently gave award for outstanding poetry to the chief minister. So I'm not. I wouldn't really think go by their endorsements. But there was a there was support. There was support. It was written about. My book came just after 6 months after Prajwal Parajuli's Gurkha's Daughter came out. They were all very happy, and one of the reasons I think is Sikkim is a fairly late entrant into almost everything. Into the Northeast is just into coming in the past 4 to 5 to 6 years. Even into the Indian Union, it came into the Indian Union in 1975. Very low population. There wasn't a great amount of literacy. So because of that, I think there wasn't, and I'm saying it at a possible risk. There were writings, and there were people writing and stuff like that, but it wasn't established as a movement or a kind of a recognized outside, not in the way it has been from Nepal, if you're talking Nepali literature, or even Darjeeling, which had a very vibrant culture. So because of that, I don't think so. We were being compared to anyone, and I think the overwhelming sentiment was pretty much good job, go for it, whatever gets the message across, just go for it. I mean, a language is a language, and people understand whatever. And then, as far as readership goes, again, I have not encountered any sentiment so far which says you shouldn't have done that, or why don't you write in Nepali, or this and that. So it's just that I think they just tell me that, well, this is our story, yeah. And some of them told me also that it didn't feel like I was reading in Nepali or English, because it's fairly simple, and then, well, what you say is much more important than how you're saying it. So it wasn't really too much of a question. I think the debate is sort of slowly dying out, or it might just be coming up, I don't know.
Okay. I think it's a little different across some of those states. Some state bodies, I think,
Yes,
feel more intensely, and that's, I think, the
this
whole.
is in no way reflective of Northeasterners.
Right. Yeah.
Not at
And
all.
that's the
So-
beauty, the diversity about the Northeast. Another stereotype is that there's a lot of unrest. You can't go to Manipur. There's a whole debate about the inner line permit, and Guwahati is an unsafe place. And I have a flight to Delhi tonight, and I'm a lot more scared than I would be, scared of going to Guwahati. But these are typical stereotypes. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, please raise your hands. Instead of us waiting till the end, we can keep it more conversation. Yeah, I think that gentleman there has a question. Is there a mic?
A mic in the front row, please.
We can hear you.
Yeah.
I think mic is coming. You can try Bengali, we'll try. Yeah.
আপনার ভেতর থেকে যেটা আসছে
সেটার জন্য তো আপনার এমন একটা ভাষা দরকার সেটাকে প্রকাশ করতে যে ভাষাটাও আপনার ভেতর থেকে আসছে। কোয়েশ্চেন, এই ক্ষেত্রে কি ইংরেজি ভাষাটা ভেতর থেকে আসে না বাইরে, অথবা নিজের মাতৃভাষাটা কোনটা আগে আসে? আমার নিজেরই প্রবলেম লাগে। আমি জার্মান ভাষায় কবিতা লিখি, অ্যাট র্যান্ডাম বাংলা ওয়ার্ড চালাই ভেতরে দিয়ে দিই, উইদাউট এনি ফুড নোট। এখন ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে ভারতের মধ্যে যেটা ঘটছে, ইংলিশ লিটারেচার, আমি জানি এটা এক্সিস্ট করছে, এটা একটা এস্টাবলিশ ব্যাপার, এর বিরুদ্ধে কিছু বলা যায় না, কিন্তু যারা লেখেন আমাদের কাছে একটাই প্রশ্ন, যে ভাষায় লেখেন সেই ভাষাতেই কি ভাবেন?
Do you think in Assamese when you write, and how does that whole conversion to English happen?
Shall I take that first?
Please, all of you can take one
This
by
is
one.
a really good question, one which is put to us very often and one which we question ourselves too very frequently about it. So I'd like to say one thing. I talked about the writers of this generation. We are more assured in English. We don't apologize for speaking or writing in English. I think this is a result of our generation having largely been more, I say global, but in the Indian sense. We've been out of our states, we've been in various cities, we've grown up in very many places, all of us. Even if we haven't, we have at least gone to schools which have taught us English. We have been speaking English from an early age. I don't want to debate if it's a good or bad thing. In the same breath, I also speak Assamese. I speak only Assamese at home. I read and write Assamese, and which I've had to taught myself because I grew up in Delhi. But I realized my necessity for a mother tongue, and I learned to read and write and explain myself in Assamese too. But as to what do we think in, what do we dream in, what do we breathe in, it's actually now for our generation, I think we can honestly say that we do it in both. We do it in both. I speak to my husband in chaste Assamese, I write to my grandmother in Assamese, but I speak to my son in English because he's growing up in Bangalore, he speaks Kannada, Tamil and English and Assamese. So we are becoming a kind of a melting pot. So English to us, I do think your question is, does it come naturally to you? Is it being imposed from the outside? It does, to a large extent, come naturally to us. Yet, I'd like to say another thing, because I've been writing for about 10 years now, and I have friends writing from different parts of the country in English. There is a different flavor. So my first collection of short stories, a fellow writer read it in Bangalore, and she said, you know what, Jahnavi, I felt I was reading a book in Ohomia English. And there is a difference, there is a flavor, because when I write in English from Assam, I am writing. So my language perhaps is a reflection of my culture, my personality. It is more subdued. It is maybe not as exuberant as somebody writing from Punjab. So when you read a short story in English from Punjab, let me tell you, you will get it because it is exuberant. There is a smell of that sarson ka khet in it. But whereas when I write from an Assam, you will get that lilt of the bihu flute, the pepper, because even if it's English, it is a subdued English. The dialogue is like, for example, in Assam, we are very much like the British, we joke. We're not very enthusiastic. We never say this is a fantastic building. We look at it and say, not bad. That's not it's a nice day. It's not too bad a day. We never say it's a beautiful day. You go to Delhi and they say, wah, shabash, badhiya hai, you know. You'll never hear that in Assam. We never get over enthusiastic. We never get too down either. So our language, when I write a lot of my fiction, the people say, your girls are so quiet, your men are so subdued and polite. I said, but that's really what we are. And our language is polite. We will say not quite, not half bad, rather a nice cup of tea. I'll never say fantastic cup of tea. That's not in my nature to say that. So every region actually in India, if you look at it closely, have developed their own forms of even English. And I lay claim to an Assamese English. Somebody lays claim to a Punjabi English. So, and we are speaking actually in that English. So really I do mean it when I say it's practically becoming an Indian language. And we do think, converse, dream of it. It's sort of an unconscious fusion of Assamese and English when we swing. And I speak a bit of Kannada, I speak Bengali fluently. So, we think in almost very many things, I don't know if that answers it, and if anybody else wants to take off on any point.
I do agree with what Jahnavi has said. We do in body languages. The thing, it is very important for me, the first sentence I write, because if I start writing in English, then automatically it comes in English. And if I write in Manipuri, then it continues to come in Manipuri. This thing, same way of life, yeah, I think so. And this I noticed later, because initially I wrote, wrote only in English. Then everything used to come to me in English only. Then later on, when I switched over to the Manipuri, then I felt that, oh, this thing is also there in me. So it comes naturally. Okay, thank you.
Raj, do you think in English? Do you pray in English?
I don't pray,
No,
but
pray.
about the language, I think it's a bit more psychotic than Janvi puts it. I think she's far too polite. It's it's a riot, yeah. It's quite a riot inside when you're writing, no. Sometimes I think landscapes I describe almost. I've never thought of landscapes in Nepali. When I'm describing people, I think of a bit of both, because most of the works you've read are in English. So you tend to think, okay, how would such and such writer do it, subconsciously. And again, dialogues would be a bit of both. Yeah? You would have to think, first of all, for what the person is saying, what's the best way of putting that in English, and then what can you carry over, what should you leave behind, all those things. And it's not simple at all, but the fact is also that you think about it only when you're asked questions, such as the gentleman asks you. But by and large, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what you're thinking, because in the end, it just comes out the way it does. That's far more important, I think.
Yeah, I think interestingly, Vijayada also does a lot of translations from Manipuri to English, and the other way around as well. Other way around it. I have not come across too many people like that, and original stories also. But do you see a sort of a loss of context and texture while you're doing that? Have people come back to you and said, no, the Manipuri version was better than the English version, or anything of that sort?
Translation is a very tough job. Actually, I think I have to put more labor in translation than I do in my writing, because I have to be faithful to the original writing. Even a slight change will go off the context, the whole thing. Then many of the stories which I have translated from Manipuri into English were written in archaic Manipuri, which many of us, actually the modern day Manipuris, don't know. So I have to take half of dictionaries, then I have to archaic Manipuri into modern Manipuri. Dictionaries are there. I have to take help of that. Then I have to ask old people. And fortunately, actually, I translated one Manipuri poem written by R.K. Bhuvansana from English, from Manipuri into English. Then Emeritus Professor Oliver John Perrier, he wrote an article on Indians writing in English and translation. That he wrote that many of the Indians writing in English, and many critics are of the opinion that when we write in English, that we can't express ourselves fully in English. Then he has cited that particular poem I have translated, that we can do it. That strangeness, all the effects have been put into it. I think I am very fortunate that he has liked my translation. I think lots of sense, I think this is naturally there, because we can't find the exact equivalent from one language to another. Then one more thing is that I think we should not try to translate idioms from directly, because if you try to translate idioms, then the whole thing will be spoiled and you can't carry forward. So it's best thing to find an equivalent one. Then otherwise you have to put in lots of footnotes and you have to do lots of explanation. And I have translated Ratnathiam's 3 plays, Manipur trilogy, that has been brought out in the form of book. It's published by Wasmith Publisher. 2 of the plays I have done without with footnotes, and 1 I have done without footnotes. I did those translations for some academics who are coming from Australia, from the UK, from the US, and from UK. So they found that my translation with the footnotes are far better than the one without it, because they were academics, they were more interested to know the details of it, and whereas the one which I had done without footnotes, I have merged the meaning in the sentence itself. So they wanted to know more about our culture, so the footnotes helped them. So, so while translating, I think we have to be careful, because if we put too many footnotes, then people may get bored, and even if we don't, then we won't be able to put across the meaning. So there has to be a tie line.
Thanks. I think that lady has a question.
Hello, I'm glad that you are talking about translation. I do a lot of translation from Assamese to English, short stories. Nowadays, as Jahnavi says, they don't like italics. I have done anthology for HarperCollins. Now what happens, mekhla chadar, I understand. You don't have to explain the skirt and the chadar. But there are very culture-specific words like urani. Urani is a kind of, new bright text. It's not a veil. Now, I mean, we are told that you put all the explanation in the text. Sometimes it becomes long-winded. And sometimes without the footnote, I mean, I think sometimes when a reader is from outside, other parts of India or even abroad, they would like to know what is the subtlety between a urani and the veil in a North India when the bride is covered up to here. So always you have to go on struggling, and especially we have lots of vegetables, shak, dhekia shak. No, you can just say it's a fern, but it's not actually fern. So that kind of struggle always goes on, I think. I mean, as a writer, Jahnavi, as a translator. But I personally feel when the words are too culture specific, I have also written a non-fiction on Brahmaputra. I have given the reference and some footnotes. I mean, otherwise, suppose this, okay, theoretically the person is reading from, say, United States or UK. And sometimes those you can't even Google because you won't find them. So what do you do then?
Yeah, I think you're right, because such culture-specific words, I think it's better to retain, because it'll show your culture and it will give a local flavor to the story. Then regarding the explanation, I think it's better to give at the back or as a footnote, as a glossary at the end. And if too many words are there, then people get bored. I think so. We have to compromise some, and we have to give some. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think
an interesting question arises here, if I may interrupt, about dialogue. When you spoke about dialogue, I realized at one point, writing in English, that I'm already a translator. Because when I write a short story set in a very metro setting where I can assume that every character will be speaking in English, then fine, I'm writing the whole story in English, right? And the dialogue is in English because that person in real life would be speaking in English. But when we write about Assam and Manipur, those are kind of semi-urban, semi-rural settings. Even Guwahati, the fringes will be semi-rural. There'll be a rice field outside your bedroom window. And a lot of the people there, the vegetable seller who comes to sell you the dhekia hak, will not be speaking in English. But in my short story, he will have to speak in English. So at one level, I realized, my goodness, I'm already a translator. So when the dhekia hak fellow asks me, "Bhai, apna lage niki," he'll be asking me that, but I'll have to say that the seller came and asked me, "Would you like to buy some dhekia hak today, Baido?" So it's very strange. When writing in English, we're already translating. I don't know if that struck me and troubled me in the beginning. And I said, I have no choice. I don't want to put him in italics Ohmia. I don't want to put him in italics English. Let him speak in English. I'll have to assume, depend on the reader's intelligence and discernment to realize that Presswala cannot obviously speak in English. I'm translating him. That's another thing which, it comes up, it creates conflict in your mind sometimes.
Not just as a writer, but even normal people speaking, you have to realize there is always some amount of translations, transliterations happening. Someone might ask you from where you are, So then if you go, it's not English, but in his head is probably saying kaha ke ho aap. So kaha from, that kind of thing, you know. So it works in that ways, I think. This kind of thing. Then I think Mr. Tanjam was talking about idioms, translating idioms. I think that's one of the biggest. It's one of the biggest pitfalls that or mistakes one can make. I remember reading something by a friend. I hope he's still my friend after this, but he had written something like something black in the lentil, you know. So he said there's something black in the lentil, and then it's what the character was actually saying was dal mein kuch kala hai. So sometimes you comicalize things, you know. It's not the best. I mean, he probably didn't want that effect, but then yeah, like this thing, some things are best left untranslated, I think. Yeah.
You'll have to find the nearest suitable metaphor, saying. You'll have to say something's confusing here or something's not right here. You can't say black in the lentil, you know. So, yeah.
Yeah. Then I want to add one more point. I have translated one of Henrik Ibsen's plays into Manipuri for Ratnatiam, that his last play, When We Dead Awaken. There I found that the thing, and in the West, the wife refers to her husband by name, and even our parents and her father-in-law and mother-in-law, which we don't do. Here we have to take certain liberties, because if I translate it directly, then this will